In this video, we're going to cover the SAT practice test number 2 from the College Board. In particular, we're going to cover module 2 of that practice test 2. So practice test number 2, module 2. The source for this is the College Board. They publish a bunch of paper practice tests. You can find them there, or you can look it up by searching College Board practice tests. As an update to this video, I just want to say currently the full-length paper practice test, the site that we just saw, only has bundles 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Practice tests 1, 2, and 3 got pulled. Now you can still find practice test number 2, and in fact, I will link that in the description of this video. Once you pull up practice test number 2, download that, then what you'll see is there's a reading and writing portion. We are not covering the reading and writing portion on this video. Then it starts the math portion of the practice test. Module 1 has been covered in another video. I can put a link to Module 1 in this video. And we're going to cover Module 2, which starts on page 40. That page gives a bunch of formulas. It tells you the number of degrees, number of radians in a circle, sum of measures of angles in a triangle. And then there's a page where it shows you how to write down your answer, whether it be a fraction or a decimal, and so on and so forth. And then the questions start. So let's go ahead and start Module 2 of Test 2. I'm going to write or type onto this Word document. So question number 1 says there are 55 students in Spanish Club. A sample of Spanish Club students was selected at random and asked whether they intended to enroll in a new study program. Of those surveys, 20% responded that they intended to enroll in the new study program. Based on this survey, which of the following is the best estimate of the total number of Spanish Club students who want to enroll in the study program? So the best estimate would be that 20% of the total students enroll in this program. So we take 20%, which as a decimal is written as 0.2 or 0.20, and multiply it times the total number of students. When I do that, I end up with 11. And so the answer to question number 1 is A, 11. Question number 2 says Jay walks at a speed of 3 miles per hour and runs at a speed of 5 miles per hour. He walks for W hours and runs for R hours for a combined total of 14 miles. Which equation represents this situation? Now, we're looking for the number of miles ran and walked combined. Since Jay walks at 3 miles per hour and he walks W hours, 3W is the amount of miles he would walk. Since Jay runs at a speed of 5 miles per hour, for R hours, 5R is the number of hours, or excuse me, 5R is the number of miles that Jay runs. So the total amount of walking plus the total amount of running should equal 14. And that is A. So question 2, the answer is A. 3W plus 5R is equal to 14. Question 3 says, the scatter plot shows the relationship between two variables x and y. A line of best fit is also shown. Which of the following equations represents the line of best fit shown? Well, first off, we look at this line and we see that it has a positive slope. So when we think of this line, it'll be y equals a positive number times x plus b. Now, the only options for slope are a positive 1.7 and a negative 1.7. Since it's clearly positive slope, because as you move left to right, it's moving up, the m is going to be a positive 1.7. The b value is the value of the y-intercept, and that is just under 3 for this line. And the actual numerical value we're seeing there is 2.8. Now, this is a positive 2.8 because it's above the origin. So y equals 1.7x plus 2.8 would be the correct answer. It doesn't matter which order you write the 1.7x plus 2.8, or like in question 3, the option that we're given is y equals 2.8 plus 1.7x. So A is the correct answer for question number 3. So question number 3 has A as the correct answer. Question 4 says the graph of y equals f of x is shown in the xy plane. What is the value of f of 0? Well, f of 0 is going to be where the y value of the y-intercept is. When you plug in 0, you're going to get the y value of the y-intercept. And in this case, what we see is that our graph passes through the point 0, 3. So since it passes through the 0, 3, when we plug in a 0 for x, we will get out a 3 for y. Therefore, f of 0 is equal to 3. And the correct answer for problem number 4 is D. So D is the correct answer for problem 4. Question 5 says, which expression is equivalent to m to the 4th times q to the 4th times z to the negative 1 power, all multiplied times m q to the 5th z to the 3rd power? Basically what we do is we do the product rule of exponents. M to the 4th times m is m raised to the 5th power because we're going to be adding exponents. Q to the 4th times q to the 5th is q to the 9th. And z to the negative 1 times z to the 3rd is going to be z squared. Negative 1 plus 3 is a 2. So we add the exponents and we get m to the 5th, q to the 9th, z squared, which means that the correct answer to problem number 5 is B. Question 6 says, what is the median of the data shown? Now, the median of the data is the middle value. Since there are 9 values shown, the middle value is going to be the 5th one in numerical order. And lucky for us, these values are already in numerical order. So the middle value is going to be the 5th one in numerical value, or in numerical order. That is the value of 79. So in this case, the answer is simply 79. That's the middle number. Question 7 says, what value of x is the solution to the given equation? We have the equation x plus 40 is equal to 95. In order to solve this equation, we would subtract 40 from both sides. If I subtract 40 on the left side, I get x. If I subtract 40 on the right side, I get 55. So the final answer for question number 7 is 55. That's the value of x. That's the solution to the given equation. Number 8 gives us two equations. It says the solution to the given system of equations is x comma y. What is the value of x plus y? Well, we start with this first equation. The first equation is 5x is equal to 15. There's no y value there. So we can solve for that for x directly here. Just divide both sides by 5, and I end up with an x value of 3. Once I know that the x value is supposed to be 3, I can plug that into the other equation and figure out what the y value is. So I'm going to take -4 times x plus y, and I'll replace the x with a 3. That gives me -12 plus y is equal to -2. Adding 12 to both sides gives me a y value of 10. So now that we know that x is 3 and y is 10, the question is asking, what is the value of x plus y? Well, x plus y has to be, therefore, 3 plus 10, which is 13. So the answer to question number 8 is 13, which is option C. So C, 13 is the correct answer. Question number 9 says the given function g models the number of gallons of gasoline that remains from a fuel tank in a car after driving m miles. According to this model, about how many gallons of gasoline are used to drive each mile? So basically what this is asking is how many gallons are used in a mile's worth of driving. Notice that as you increase m by 1, let's say we go from 0 to 1, then the number of gallons in the tank is going to go down by 0.05. And therefore, that means you use 0.05 gallons per mile. This is the direct way to do it. You just interpret that slope means that the number of gallons in the tank is dropping by 0.05. So that means you're using 0.05 gallons per mile. And therefore, the answer to this question is A, which is 0.05. Question 10 says the given equation relates the positive numbers b, x, and y. Which equation correctly expresses x in terms of b and y? So notice that we have options. They're all options where x is equal to an expression. So the goal is to solve this expression for the variable x. We take 1 over 7b, set that equal to 11x over y, and we solve for x. The way I would do this is I would multiply y on both sides. If you multiply both sides by y, you end up with y divided by 7b is equal to 11x. That's after you multiply y on both sides. And then you divide by 11. Now, be careful when you do this. When you divide by 11, what's going to happen is we're going to get y over 7b. And then when I divide by 11, one way to think about it is that 11 is going into the denominator. So it's going to be y over 7 times 11b. So dividing by 11 gives us a 77b as the denominator. Obviously, I wrote the x on the right-hand side. You could just as easily write the x on the left-hand side. If I write the x on the left-hand side, I get x is equal to y over 77b, which is option C. Therefore, the answer to question 10 is option C. Question 11 gives us y is equal to 76 and y is equal to x squared minus 5. Then it says the graphs of the given equations in the xy plane intersect at point x comma y. What is a possible value of x? So we want to figure out where these two intersect and then ask ourselves what values of x where will they intersect at. So intersection is going to happen when the outputs are equal. So in other words, when the output of x squared minus 5 is equal to the output of 76. Y is the output, x is the input in my terminology. And therefore, all we have to do is solve this equation. Now, in this case, the easiest way to solve this is add 5 to both sides. That would give you x squared is equal to 81. And then, since x squared is equal to 81, we could take a positive and a negative square root of 81 to give us two options for solutions. The positive square root of 81 would give me x equals 9. When I take the negative square root of 81, I would get x equals negative 9. Now, the only option, so we want to find a possible value of x. A possible value is negative 9 or b. The 9 is not up here, so we just have to use the negative 9. So b is one possible value. And the other possible value that they don't have is positive 9. So negative 9, b is the answer to problem number 11. Problem number 12 gives two inequalities. It says the point x comma 53 is a solution to the system of inequalities in the xy plane. Which of the following could be the value of x? Now, I want to point out that this means we can plug in that point into both inequalities and get a true statement. Now, for the first inequality, we'd end up with 53 is greater than 14. That's going to work no matter what value x is. So regardless of the value of x, this first inequality will be satisfied. So now let's figure out this second inequality and when that is going to be satisfied. Well, if I plug in x comma 53, I end up with 4x plus 53 is less than 18. Subtracting 53 from both sides would give me 4x is less than negative 35. Again, this is the first inequality. I'm going to get rid of that. That's always true. Second inequality has this. Dividing by 4 gives me that x has to be less than negative 8.75. So when we're asked which of the following could be the value of x, I know that my x values have to be less than negative 8.75 if the y value is 53. So the only option that we have there is A, which is negative 9. So A is the final answer to question 12. That's the only option which is less than negative 8.75. Thirteen says out of 300 seeds that were planted, 80% sprouted. How many of these seeds sprouted? Well, if 80% of 300 seeds were sprouted, all we have to do is take 80%, 0.80, and multiply it times the number of seeds we have, which is obviously 300. So you can take 300 times 0.8 or 0.8 times 300. Either way, you get 240. And therefore, 240 seeds sprouted. And that's the answer to question 13. 240 is the answer. So that's 13, excuse me. So that's the answer to question 13. Question 14 asks, it says, the function f is defined by f of x is equal to 4x. For what value of x does f of x equals 8? Now you could try and plug in values. You could also use your graphing calculator. But basically what we're saying is the output of 4x has to be equal to 8. What value of x does that happen? You can figure this out by dividing both sides by 4. So when you divide both sides by 4, you get x equals 2. And that's the final answer. 2 is the value of x for which f of x is equal to 8. For question 15, it says which expression is equivalent to 8x times the quantity x minus 7 minus 3 times the quantity x minus 7, all divided by 2x minus 14, where x is greater than 7. Now, this seems like it's a tough deal. It's not quite as tough as you may think it is if you see the trick. Now, you could multiply things out and combine like terms, but it turns out in this case, it's going to be better to keep the x minus 7s in parentheses. So in the numerator, I'm going to leave it alone for step 1. The denominator is 2x minus 14. And what you'll notice about 2x minus 14 is that if I factor out the greatest common factor of 2, that will give me 2 times the quantity x minus 7. Therefore, what we can do is we can see the top equation, or the top part of this equation, the numerator, and say, well, each of these x minus 7s is going to cancel out with the x minus 7 on the bottom. Or what you can do is you can think of it as factoring out a factor of x minus 7. If I factor out a factor of x minus 7 on the top, I'm left with 8x minus 3 times the quantity x minus 7. And then the x minus 7s can cancel out. So whichever way you want to think about that is fine. We end up getting on top 8x minus 3, and on bottom a 2. So in other words, the numerator is going to be 8x minus 3. The denominator is going to be 2. And that is option B. So B is the correct answer to problem number 15. 8x minus 3, all divided by 2. Question 16 says line P is defined by 2y plus 18x is equal to 9. Line R is perpendicular to line P. What is the slope of line R? So we need to know two things. First off, we need to know how to find the slope of the given line, that is the slope of line P. The quick way I would do it is I would solve for y. So I would subtract 18x from both sides. That would give you 2y is equal to negative 18x plus 9. And then I would divide both sides by 2, giving me y is equal to negative 9x plus 4.5. So that's line P rewritten in slope-intercept form. And so now I know that the slope of line P is negative 9. If the slope of line P is negative 9, that's one thing. But we said line R is perpendicular to line P. So perpendicular slopes are negative reciprocals. And negative reciprocals have the situation where if I have written one of the slopes as A over B, then the other would be negative B over A. Reciprocals mean we flip the roles of the numerator and denominator, and then negative means one's the negative of the other. So what I would do is I would think of negative 9 as like negative 9 divided by 1, and therefore the slope of line R is going to be the negative reciprocal of negative 9, which is a positive 1/9. And that's option C. Therefore, option C is the answer to question 16, 1/9. Let's take a look at question 17. The given function models the number of coupons a company sells to their customers at the end of each year, where T represents the number of years since the end of 1998, and T spans from 0 to 5. If Y is equal to F of T is graphed in the TY plane, which of the following is the best interpretation of the Y-intercept of the graph in this context? Now, the y-intercept is going to be what you get when you plug in t of 0. So y-intercept means that t is going to be 0. And if you do that, you end up with f of 0 is equal to 8,000. Because 0.65 raised to the 0 power is 8,000, is 1. And then times 8,000 is 8,000. So I get 8,000 times 1, which is 8,000. Remember, T stood for the number of years since the end of 1998. So what we're saying there is at 0, we're at the end of 1998. And F is giving me the number of coupons a company sent to customers. So what it's telling us is that at the end of 1998, the number of coupons sent to customers was 8,000. That, by the way, is what's stated in D. So we're looking at D there, the estimated number of coupons the company sent to their customers at the end of 1998 was 8,000. So D is the answer to question 17. For question 18, we have triangle XYZ is similar to triangle RST such that X, Y, and Z correspond to R, S, and T respectively. The measure of angle Z is 20 degrees and 2XY is equal to RS. What is the measure of angle T? So let's take a look. I'm going to kind of draw this out a little bit and then I'll put it in the Word document. But we'll draw a triangle XYZ that's similar to RST such that we have these comparisons. Now, I did not draw these appropriate to scale, but this is what we have. We have X, Y, Z corresponding to R, S, T respectively. So the X is matched up with the R, the Y is matched up with the S, and the Z is matched up with the T. And actually, I should have drawn RST bigger because we know RS is equal to double the length of XY. So I should have drawn this triangle much bigger. But that doesn't actually matter. The fact that RS is double XY is irrelevant to the measure of T. Notice that the measure of T has to be the same as the measure of Z. And so basically what we have is that T, since it's the same as measure of angle Z, also has to be 20. So all of that other stuff, all of the fact that 2XY is equal to RS, that actually doesn't come into play. And we can just say angle T is measured at 20 or 20 degrees, which is option C. So the answer to question 18 is option C. And that comes from just having similar triangles where Z corresponds to T. We know Z corresponds to T because that's the order they were written in. And that's what the word respectively is saying. Respectively means with the same order they were written. So X and R go together, Y and S, Z and T. So that's all we have to do. T is the same measure as angle Z, therefore it has angle 20 degrees, and the answer to 18 is C, 20 degrees. Question 19 says one of the equations in a system of linear equations is given. The system has no solution. Which equation could be the second equation in the system? Now, basically, to have no solution means that we have to have the same slope, but a different intercept. So we're going to have the same setup, but it won't have to be equal to 18. Now, you can do a number of things. What I'm going to do, since all of these start with X and Y on the same side, I'm going to subtract 6X from both sides and view that original equation as negative 6X plus Y is equal to 18. Now, if we're looking at these options, option A is clearly the same equation as the given equation. So if those two are the same equations, the system of linear equations is going to have infinitely many solutions. So option A does not work. Option B, well, it's going to have the same slope because the coefficients of X and Y are the same. And it's not going to have the same y-intercept because 18 and 22 are different. Therefore, in terms of solutions, we're going to have two parallel lines, which means we have no solution. So option B is the correct option. Now we could stop there if we wanted to. We could just say circle B and move on. But I wanted to point out in C and D, because these coefficients aren't matching up, because they're different ratios from each other. One is, we're talking about -6 compared to 1. Here we're talking about -12 compared to 1, or -12 compared to 1. We end up with different slopes. So this line will cross the option C in one spot, and it will also cross option D in one spot. So since we have different slopes in C and D from our given line, that'll give me one solution, and that's not what we want. So B is the only correct answer for question 19. Question 20 says, what is the area in square centimeters of a rectangle whose length is 34 centimeters and whose width is 29 centimeters? So a rectangle has area, which is equal to length times width. If you don't know that offhand, then it is one of the formulas that you see on the practice test. Area is length times width. You can write that as L times W. It's the same thing if you do width times length, like I wrote it. Width times length or length times width are the same thing. So whichever way you write it, length times width or width times length, all we have to do is put in the two values that we were given. It says the length is 34 centimeters and it says the width is 29. So whether you take 29 times 34 or 34 times 29, either way, you end up with 986, and this would be in squared centimeters. So 986 is the correct answer. 986 square centimeters is the area of the given rectangle. Question 21 says the solution to the given system of equations is x comma y. What is the value of x minus y? So the goal here is to find the solution to this system of linear equations. Now, there's a number of different ways you can find the solution. You can use the elimination method, you can use substitution method, you can use lots and lots of other methods. I'm going to use the substitution method. You can also graph too. So what I'm going to do, since we have y equals an expression with x, I'm going to take the second equation, which is 4y equals 15 minus 8. And I'm going to replace the y in that second equation with 4x plus 1. When I do that, then so 4y is equal to 15x minus 8. When I do my substitution, I get 4 times the quantity 4x plus 1 is all equal to 15x minus 8. So now I can solve for x. We'd end up getting 16x plus 4 is equal to 15x minus 8. Subtracting 15x from both sides and then subtracting 4 from both sides gives you 1x is equal to negative 12. So subtract 15x from both sides and then subtract the 4 from both sides. That gives you an x is equal to negative 12. And then we can find y by plugging that negative 12 into either the first or the second equation. It'll be a little bit easier in the first equation because I don't have a coefficient on my y, or it's an implied 1. So plug in negative 12 into that first equation. 4 times negative 12 plus 1 becomes a negative 47. And now we know that the ordered pair is negative 12, comma, negative 47. That is the solution to this system of equations. Now, 21 is not asking you for the solution. It's asking you for what is x minus y. Be careful here because y is negative. We're going to have negative 12 minus a negative 47. And when we do that subtraction, that's like taking negative 12 plus 47, which becomes 35. So 35 is my final answer to question number 21. The value of x minus y is 35. Question 22 asks, how many distinct real solutions does this equation have? Now, this is a quadratic equation, so the solutions will be of the form opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, where b is the coefficient of the x, a is the coefficient of the x squared, and c is my constant. So in this case, a would have been 5, b would have been 10, c would have been 16. So those are the solutions. How do I know if they're going to be real solutions or not? How many distinct real solutions? I could do the entire calculation and see what I get, but you'll notice this part, the part involving the square root, specifically b squared minus 4ac, if that part is a positive number, if b squared minus 4ac is positive, I'm going to end up with 2 real solutions. If b squared minus 4ac is 0, I'm going to end up with 1 solution. And if b squared minus 4ac is negative, I'm going to end up with no real solutions. I'm only going to have 2 complex number solutions. So you could do the entire calculation if you want, but I'm just going to do the calculation of the b squared minus 4ac. So let's go ahead and do that calculation. B squared minus 4ac, give a little space, is going to be 10 squared minus 4 times 5 times 16. That's going to be 100 minus 320. So b squared minus 4ac in this case is going to be a negative 220. Actually, I'll just write it below. And that's all we really need to know, because now we're going to have a negative under the square root, and that's going to lead us to have 2 complex number solutions. And therefore, there's going to be no real number solutions. So the answer is, how many distinct real number solutions does the equation have? It has 0. It has D, 0 real number solutions. 2 complex number solutions, 0 real. Now, this isn't the only way you could have done this. You could have also, if you'd liked, you could have done this via graphing. You could have graphed the equation y equals 5x squared plus 10x plus 16 and seeing if it crosses the x-axis anywhere. Because if it crosses the x-axis, that means the y value would have had to have been 0. If it doesn't ever cross the x-axis, then you have no zeros, no solutions to that equation. If it crossed the x-axis twice, you'd have exactly 2 solutions to that equation. And if it hit the x-axis once, you get exactly 1 solution to that equation. So that's another option if you'd like. Either way, we end up with 0 solutions, 0 real solutions for this quadratic equation. Question 23 says a certain park has an area of 11,863,808 square yards. What is the area in square miles of this park? And then it says 1 mile equals 1,760 yards. So first thing we need to do is realize that if 1 mile is equal to 1,760 yards, then by squaring both sides, we would end up with 1 square mile conversion to square yards. In other words, squaring the left-hand side gives me 1 square mile. Squaring the right-hand side means it's equal to 3,097,600. So that is 3,097,600 square yards. Again, I'm just squaring 1760 on my calculator. We're taking 1760 times itself. So that's the conversion from square miles to square yards. Now it says the certain park has 11,863,808 square yards. So if we have 11,863,808 square yards, if I want to convert that to square miles, one way to do that is to multiply by a fraction whose numerator has square miles and whose denominator has square yards, but the total fraction is equivalencies. So since 1 square mile is equal to 3,097,600 square yards, we just multiply that way. And that would change from square yards to square miles. When you do that calculation, 11,863,808 times 1 divided by 3,097,600, you end up with exactly 3.83 square miles. And so the answer to question 23 is option B, which is 3.83 square miles. That's how many square miles are in the park, which has 11,863,808 square yards. (24) says, which of the following equations represents a circle in the xy plane that intersects the y-axis at exactly 1 point? Now, here's how I think of this. The equation of a circle is always written as x minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to the radius squared, where r is the radius, hk, the point hk, is equal to the center of the circle. So we want to intersect the y-axis at precisely 1 point. What we see here is that for option A, we have a center at the point 8, 8 with radius equal to 4. Since the center is at 8, 8 with a radius of 4, if we kind of graph that out, we go, let's do it steps of 8 units to the right, 8 units up. Our center is going to be here. I can get back at most 4 units. So I'm never going to hit the y-axis in that scenario. So A is not going to work. B, well, B is going to have a center at the point 8, 4. With radius of 4. Okay. When I think about that, up here at 8, 4, so I'm thinking of like each tick mark is a measurement of size 4. So think of it this way. 8, 4 would be this point. If we are radius 4, then the most left I can go is down to an x value of 4. This would touch the x-axis, but it does not touch the y-axis. So option B does not work either. Option C, well, the center is going to be at x value of 4, y value of 9. Radius is 4. And if you think about where this is going to be at, it's going to be at 4, 9, somewhere up here. Since it has radius 4, it's going to move 4 to the left, 4 to the right. And we're going to end up actually touching the y-axis here. So option C is touching the y-axis. So C is the one that works. Now, just to be thorough, let's take a look at option D. D would be at 0, 9, center at 0, 9. And if we had radius 4, we'd cross the x-axis both above and below. So we'd actually cross the, not x-axis, excuse me. We'd cross the y-axis in 2 spots if we were using D. So D has center 0, 9 with radius of 4. So the only one that we can see which is going to cross the y-axis at one point is option C. Therefore, option C is the answer to number 24. Let's take a look at problem 25. Problem 25 says in triangles ABC and DEF, angles B and E each have measure 27 degrees. Angles C and F each have measure 41 degrees. What is the additional piece of information? Which additional piece of information is sufficient to determine whether triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF? So remember what this word congruent means it means not only is it a similar triangle, but also the lengths of sides are the same. And therefore, well, let me explain that better. So similar triangles have the angles all the same. Congruent triangles have the angles all the same and also the side lengths the same. Let me insert a little picture here. There we go. So this is how I drew it. You could draw it differently. But basically, we know because we know these two angles that the angle A, we know what that angle is going to be. So we're guaranteed that the triangles are similar to each other. And we can actually find out the measure of angle A. So we don't need the new measure of angle A or the new measure of angle D. I say new. We don't need that measure because we could find it out if we wanted to, because we know the angles of a triangle add up to 180. In fact, if we did that, we could say that angle A is 112 and D is 112. Congruent also means that they have the same side lengths all over. So not only are they similar, but they're the same lengths. And I'm guaranteed that if the length of side BC is equal to the length of side EF, then these other two measurements will also be equal. So in other words, if I know the lengths of side BC and EF, then I will know if the triangles measure the same in every category. So if AB is equal to DE and if AC is equal to DF. So we only need to know the side lengths of corresponding sides to know whether these two triangles are congruent or not. And that's option C. So we already know that they're similar. To look for congruency, we just need to know what measurement these two similar sides are. If they're the same, then the triangles are congruent. If they're different, then the triangles are not congruent. So the answer to question 25 is option C. Let's take a look at question 26. That says, here we have two data sets. I'll make this a little bit bigger. Of 23 integers each. And we see the histograms for these two data sets. The histogram for the first interval represents the frequency of integers greater than or equal to 10, but less than 20. The second interval represents the frequency of integers greater than or equal to 20, but less than 30. And so on and so forth. What is the smallest possible difference between the average of data set A and the average or mean of data set B? Now, if we just pretend that all of the middle numbers are represented as the frequency, in other words, if I just pretend like 25 happens 3 times and 35 happens 4 times and so on and so forth, then that's not actually going to get us the correct answer because it says, what is the smallest possible difference? And it turns out for this data set A could include all the 3 of our numbers here could have been 20. And all 4 of these numbers in this category could have been 30. And all 7 of the numbers in this category could have been 40. and 9 of the numbers in this category could have been 50. So data set A could be distributed in the following way. It could be that we have 3 copies of the number 20, and we have 4 copies of the number 30, and we have 7 copies of the number 40, and 9 copies of the number 50. So we could have A be that way. And if we were looking for the smallest difference, we could say, what if all of the numbers were sort of at the maximum value over here? The maximum integer that's between 10 and 20, in other words, that's less than 20, is 19. So we could have 3 copies of the number 19 in our data set B, and 4 copies of the number 29 in our data set B, and 7 copies of the number 39, and 9 copies of the number 49. And that would give me the histogram that we get in data set B. Now you can find the average by hand if you'd like, but all you have to do is realize that from going from set A to set B, we dropped each number by a factor of 1. We just subtracted 1 from each number. And therefore, the differences could be as small as 1. This is not guaranteed to be differences of exactly 1, but the difference in each of the numbers could be as small as 1, and therefore the difference in the mean could be as small as 1. So answer B is the correct answer to problem 26. Okay, smallest possible. Now, likely it's not that number, but smallest possible is that. Let's take a look at question 27. It says a right triangle has legs with lengths of 24 centimeters and 21 centimeters. So 24 and 21 centimeters. If the length of this triangle's hypotenuse in centimeters can be written in the form 3 times the square root of d, where d is an integer, what is the value of d? Now, in this problem, there's a couple of different ways you can do it, but probably the most obvious way is to say, since we have a right triangle, and I'm talking about the lengths of the legs and the length of the hypotenuse, I'm going to be using the Pythagorean theorem, which says that the lengths of the legs squared and added up has to be the length of the hypotenuse squared. In other words, a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared, where a and b are the lengths of the legs and c is the length of the hypotenuse. So we would take 24 squared plus 21 squared and set that equal to c squared. When I take 21 squared plus 24 squared, or 24 squared plus 21 squared, I get 1017. Oop. So 1017 is equal to c squared. Square root that, and c is going to be, since it's a length, it's going to be the positive square root of 1017. Now we know we're going to have to factor out a 3. And when I say factor out a 3, from the inside, that means we're going to have the square root of 9 times some other number. Let me do it this way. So divide 1017 by 9, and you would get 113. The square root of 9 is 3. And so the length of C is square root of 9. That's what I mean. The length of C is 3 times the square root of 113. That's the same thing as square root of 9 times 113. Now the question isn't asking me for the length of the hypotenuse. It's only asking me for the D part, where D is an integer. So the answer here is that D is equal to 113. So the answer to 27 is 113. And that's it. So that completes the math portion of Module 2 on practice test number 2, produced by the College Board. Once again, I will put a link in the description of this video to this practice test. I will also put a link in this video to the Math Module 1 portion of this practice test as well.